At exactly 0117 hours on March 19, 2026, the horizon east of Ras Laffan Industrial City turned white. Not from dawn, not from a tanker fire, from 17 simultaneous detonations across the largest concentration of liquefied natural gas infrastructure on the surface of the Earth. What the world's markets had feared for 3 weeks had just become kinetic reality. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps had pulled the trigger on a strike that the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency had been tracking for 72 hours. A coordinated multi-vector ballistic missile and loitering munition assault on Qatar's North Field processing terminals, launched from mobile tel platforms concealed in the Zagros mountain range and from IRGC fast boat squadrons deployed 40 nautical miles off the Omani coast. The target was not just infrastructure, it was a message. If the U.S. and Israel would not stop the war on Iran, then the entire global economy would burn with it. This is what the next 47 minutes look like inside the USS Abraham Lincoln's Combat Information Center, in the skies above the Persian Gulf and on the burning keys of Ras Laffan. Buckle in. The attack opened not with the missiles, but with silence. At 03:12 hours, Qatari Air Defense Command at Al Udeid Air Base registered a sudden drop in all radio frequency emissions across a 200-kilometer corridor stretching from Bandar Abbas to the Qeshm Island Naval Base. This was not a technical glitch. This was an RF blackout, the electromagnetic fingerprint of a coordinated IRGC electronic warfare pre-strike protocol. The Kahir 313 EW platform, Iran's domestically produced electronic warfare aircraft, was suppressing Qatar's long-range early warning radar network by flooding the S-band spectrum with targeted jamming signals tuned to the precise frequencies of the AN/FPS 117 ground-based radars protecting the northern Gulf. In the USS Abraham Lincoln's CIC, the electronic warfare officer, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Hollins, called it immediately. "We have deliberate jamming on Qatari ground-based radar. That is a pre-strike signature. I am designating this a Whiskey 1 event." The Carrier Strike Group commander, Rear Admiral James Thornton, did not hesitate. He ordered the CSG into EMCON Alpha and activated the Link 16 tactical data network, pushing the threat picture to every warship in the formation simultaneously. The Aegis cruiser USS Bunker Hill and the destroyers USS Michael Mansour and USS Delbert D. Black received the feed within 1.2 seconds. At 0317, the missiles were already airborne. Iranian IRGC Aerospace Force had launched 19 Fateh 313 solid propellant ballistic missiles from mobile launchers in Bushehr Province along a flat trajectory, terrain-hugging flight path designed to compress radar detection time to under 90 seconds. Simultaneously, 34 Shahed 136 loitering munitions, the same kamikaze drone design that had ravaged Ukrainian infrastructure throughout 2024, were launched from fast attack craft in the Gulf, flying nap of the Earth at 180 kilometers per hour on GPS inertial hybrid guidance. And from the east, 8-rod cruise missiles, subsonic sea skimmers modeled on the Chinese Sea-02 anti-ship platform, were threading their way through the radar shadow of Qatar's offshore drilling platforms. 3 attack vectors, 3 different flight profiles, 3 different radar cross-sections, all arriving on target within a 90-second window. It was not improvised. This had been planned for months. Al Udeid Air Base's Patriot PAC-3 MSE batteries went active at 0318,004. The AN/MPQ MPQ-65 radar array achieved track on 11 of the 19 Fateh 313 missiles within 6 seconds, but the terrain-hugging trajectory had eaten into the intercept window. The Patriot system was designed to engage theater ballistic missiles on high-arcing trajectories, providing up to 4 minutes of tracking time. Against a depressed trajectory launch, that window had been cut to under 80 seconds. The battery commander at Al Udeid, Major Ali Al-Kuwari of the Qatari Emiri Air Force, made a decision that likely saved the North Field's liquefaction trains. He did not wait for full track confirmation on all 19 missiles. He launched on the 11 he had, firing a 2-shot salvo at each 22 PAX-3 interceptors, burning into the pre-dawn sky in a sequence of white comet trails. 7 intercepts confirmed. 4 missiles detonated above 8,000 feet. 3 burned through. At the same time, the Shahed swarm was entering radar coverage at low altitude, and the picture on the Qatari FAAD Forward Area Air Defense Network was catastrophic. 34 contacts at 50 meters altitude, dispersed across a 40-kilometer front, approaching from multiple bearings. The CRAM batteries, counter-rocket artillery and mortar systems, at Ras Laffan's perimeter opened fire with their M168 Vulcan rotary cannons, filling the air with 20mm proximity-fused rounds at 3,000 rounds per minute. But CIWS is designed for point defense of a single asset. Against a 34-drone swarm attacking on multiple vectors, the geometry was impossible. The drones split into 3 subgroups, 12 targeting the LNG liquefaction trains on the southern quay, 11 aiming for the LPG fractionation units on the western terminal, and 11 flying directly at the Ras Laffan port loading arms. The USS Bunker Hill's SPY-1 radar, operating at X-band from 180 kilometers to the northeast, detected the Rod cruise missiles threading the offshore platform corridor at 0319. The Aegis weapons system designated the 8 contacts as vampire tracks, hostile anti-ship missiles, and began computing intercept solutions. But these missiles were not heading for the carrier strike group. They were heading for the Ras Laffan jetty, where 2 LNG tankers, the Algeria and the Al-Gatara, were loaded and moored. Rear Admiral Thornton gave the order that American doctrine rarely permits. He authorized Standard Missile 6 shots against targets over Qatari territorial waters. The USS Michael Mansour's VLS cells opened, and 4 SM-6 dual-eye missiles ignited, each carrying an active radar seeker capable of engaging both ballistic and cruise missile threats. The SM-6's combined inertial radar terminal homing tracked the raid missiles through the offshore clutter and detonated 3 of the 8. The remaining 5 dove into the jetty area at 0321. At 0322, the world's largest LNG facility was on fire. Ras Laffan Industrial City covers 106 square kilometers. It processes 77 million tons of LNG per year, nearly a third of global seaborne LNG supply. The North Field beneath it is the world's largest natural gas reservoir, holding more gas than Saudi Arabia has oil. When the first Fateh 313 ballistic missile impacted Train 7 of Qatar Gas's North Field expansion facility at 03-22-111, it did not simply destroy a building. It ruptured a 40-meter cryogenic containment vessel holding liquefied methane at minus 162 degrees Celsius. The result was a boil-off event, a rapid phase transition from liquid to gas that generated a vapor cloud 600 meters wide in under 40 seconds. When that cloud reached the ignition source from the missile impact, the resulting deflagration was visible from Bahrain, 150 kilometers to the northwest. Simultaneously, the Shahed drones that penetrated the CIWS perimeter struck the fractionation units on the western terminal, igniting LPG storage spheres in a secondary explosion chain that fire investigators would later describe as the largest industrial fire in the Gulf since the Kuwaiti oil well fires of 1991. The 2 moored LNG tankers, Algeria and Al-Gatara, were not struck directly, but the blast overpressure from the Train 7 explosion sheared all 6 of Algeria's loading arm connections simultaneously. The vessel, still carrying 96,000 cubic meters of LNG in her cargo tanks, began drifting free in the burning harbor, her crew executing an emergency departure with fire raging on the quay around them. In Washington, D.C., it was 11:17 p.m. on March 18th. The National Security Council convened in the Situation Room within minutes of the first impact report from CENTCOM. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent was on a secure line with the Saudi and UAE finance ministers. Brent crude oil, which had closed at $103 a barrel the previous day, was trading at $119 in after-hours markets and climbing. Asian LNG spot prices spiked 40% in under 6 minutes. The IRGC had just fired the most consequential missile barrage in the history of energy infrastructure warfare. Rear Admiral Thornton did not wait for authorization from Fifth Fleet. His rules of engagement, updated 72 hours earlier under the new CENTCOM OPLAN 58026, gave him authority to conduct defensive operations against any IRGC platform that had participated in the attack. The evidence of origin was already in the system. The AN-STACH TB-2 X-band radar aboard a THAAD battery deployed to Qatar had backtracked the Fateh 313 ballistic trajectories to their launch origin in Bushehr Province, and SIGINT collected by a Boeing RC-135V rivet joint orbiting at altitude over the northern Gulf had captured the encrypted launch authorization signal from IRGC Safe Force headquarters in Tehran 17 seconds before the first missile welted at 0325, the Abraham Lincoln's flight deck roared to life. 4 FA-18E Super Hornets of Strike Fighter Squadron 105, the Eagles, were already at Alert 5 on the catapults, engines running. They were off the deck within 90 seconds of the launch order. Each carried 4 AGM-88 ERGM anti-radiation missiles, specifically loaded to prosecute Iranian surface-to-air missile radar emitters and 2 GBM missiles radar emitters and 2 GBU-31 JDAMs for infrastructure targeting. Following them, 2 EA-18G Growler electronic attack aircraft from Electronic Attack Squadron 130, armed with ALQ-99 jamming pods and AGM-88s, were airborne by 0328. Their role to surgically blind the IRGC air defense network covering the launch sites in Bushehr Province before the strike package arrived. Simultaneously, the USS Michael Mansour completed a sprint to firing position at 0329 and opened its BLS cells for a Tomahawk land attack missile salvo. 14 Block B TLMs, each carrying a 450-kilogram unitary warhead and equipped with the new digital scene matching area correlator guidance system, were programmed with aim points targeting the mobile launcher staging areas, the IRGC Aerospace Force Regional Headquarters at Khorramshahr Air Base, and the electronic warfare relay stations on Keshm Island that had conducted the initial radar jamming operation. The missiles tracked west at 880 kilometers per hour, threading Iranian airspace at 50 meters altitude, their terrain contour matching navigation, updating every 1.7 seconds against downloaded digital elevation models of the Zagros foothills. At 0331, the EA-18 Growlers entered the engagement zone and began a coordinated suppression operation. The ALQ-99 tactical jamming system, operating across the full frequency spectrum from 64 MHz to 18 GHz, targeted the acquisition radars of Iran's HQ-9B surface-to-air missile batteries deployed to cover the Bushehr coastline. Without their radar eyes, the Iranian sand crews were firing blind. 3 SA-10 Grumble missiles were launched against the jamming signal source, but without terminal radar guidance, they flew ballistically into the Gulf and impacted harmlessly in international waters. The Super Hornets arrived at target coordinates at 0341. What they found on the imagery from the ANSQ-228 Aflir targeting pod was the smoking debris of mobile launchers. The IRGC had followed standard shoot-and-scoot doctrine, launch and immediately relocate, but 2 TEL vehicles had not completed their displacement moves. The infrared signatures of their engines were still warm, visible to the ATFIR sensor from 15 nautical miles at altitude. Both vehicles were struck with GBU-31 JDAMs within 14 seconds of each other. The shock waves were audible to IRGC garrison personnel at Bushehr Naval Base, 23 kilometers to the northwest. While the Tomahawks were still in flight, a new threat signature appeared on Rear Admiral Thornton's tactical screen. 15 IRGC fast attack craft, Blade Runner Hull Siraj 1, and Zulfiqar missile boats, capable of 70 knots and armed with the Nasra 1 anti-ship missile system, had departed Bandar Abbas and were converging in a swarm formation at the entrance to the Strait of Hormuz. This was the IRGC Navy's signature hybrid threat doctrine. Use mass, speed, and distributed geometry to saturate a carrier strike group's close-in defenses and force a catastrophic choice between defensive fire and restraint. The Strait of Hormuz is 33 nautical miles wide at its narrowest point. In those waters, 70-knot fast boats can close to anti-ship missile range in under 4 minutes. The USS Delbert D. Black, positioned as the strike group's forward picket, detected the swarm on its SPQ-9B radar at 0342 and immediately relayed the context to the Lincoln CIC. The geometry was clear. If the fast boats reached missile engagement zone, They could saturate the strike group's SM-2 and ESSM defensive missiles with simultaneous salvos from 30 separate launch platforms. Rear Admiral Thornton activated the Strait Response Plan and ordered the Lincoln to full sprint at 30 knots, turning south to open the range. He did not run from the fight. He was creating the geometry he needed. At 0348, two MH-60R Seahawk helicopters from Helicopter Maritime Strike Squadron 75 launched from the USS Delbert D. Black armed with AGM-114N metal-augmented charge Hellfire missiles, specifically designed for surface vessel prosecution. Flying no way at 50 feet above the Gulf swell in night vision, the Seahawks approached the IRGC swarm from the east with the moon at their backs, invisible against the dark horizon. The lead aircraft, piloted by Lieutenant Commander Marcus Webb, achieved a targeting solution on the lead Zulfiqar missile boat at 0351 and called the shot. 6 Hellfires in 22 seconds. 3 IRGC fast attack craft destroyed, 2 disabled. The surviving 10 IRGC boats did not scatter. Their doctrine demanded they close the range. But at that moment, the P-8A Poseidon Maritime Patrol aircraft operating at 25,000 feet transmitted a contact update that changed the tactical picture entirely. The IRGC boats had not sailed alone. Beneath them, at 120 meters depth, the hull transient signal of an improved Kylo-class submarine, identified by acoustic library comparison as the IRIS Fateh, was moving southwest at 8 knots, positioned directly ahead of the carrier strike group's intended evasion course. Iran had set a kill box. The surface swarm was the anvil. The submarine was the hammer. A Virginia-class submarine, the USS Indiana, had been trailing the USS Indiana, had been trailing the IRIS Fateh for 11 hours. Its commanding officer, Commander David Park, had classified sonar bearings on the Iranian boat that were accurate to 40 meters. At 0353, Commander Park received the order he had been waiting for. Prosecute. Hold fire until weapons-free designation. What followed was not a torpedo engagement. It was a demonstration. The USS Indiana executed an active sonar prosecution at minimum range, transmitting a single, focused 3.5 kilohertz active pulse that the Iranian submarine crew could not have mistaken for anything other than a solution ping from a weapon-ready adversary at knife-fight distance. The acoustic shock inside the IRIS Fateh's control room was described by IRGC Navy personnel in later debriefs as like being struck by a hammer from inside the hull. The submarine emergency blew its ballast tanks and shot to periscope depth. Her crew panicked. Her tactical picture scrambled. At 0355, the IRGC fast attack boats received a coded order from the Bandar Abbas sector commander and began a high-speed reversal. They turned north. The swarm was withdrawing. By 4-1 was withdrawing. By 4-1 hours on March 19th, the tactical engagement was over. The strategic consequences were just beginning. Ras Laffan Industrial City's western terminal was still burning. 3 LNG liquefaction trains, trains 5, 7, and 8 of the Qatar Northfield expansion, were offline. Together, they represented 24 million tons per year of LNG production capacity, or approximately 6.5% of global LNG supply. 14 Qatari contract workers had been killed in the initial strike. The Al Ghariya had made it safely to Anchorage, her crew intact. The Al Ghutara had not. She had been struck by a Shahed drone in her final approach to the emergency anchorage and was listing 12 degrees in the harbor entrance, her cargo tanks intact, but her engine room flooded. In Tehran, no official statement was released. The IRGC's social media channels, which had broadcast triumphant videos of the missile launches within minutes of impact, went suddenly dark. The Supreme National Security Council was in emergency session. Its membership diminished. Iran's top security official Ali Larijani had been killed by an Israeli strike 2 days earlier on March 17th, and no successor had yet been formally appointed. The IRGC Aerospace Force commander was presenting damage assessments to a council that was rapidly running out of senior decision-makers. In Washington, President Trump authorized the emergency release of 50 million barrels from the U.S. Strategic Petroleum Reserve and was on a call with the Saudi Crown Prince within the hour. The Saudis, who had already declared that their patience was not unlimited following Iranian missile strikes on their own territory, were now openly discussing military options. The Gulf Cooperation Council's Peninsular Shield Force was placed on its highest readiness posture since the 1990 Kuwait invasion. Japan, which receives 20% of its LNG from Ras Laffan, declared a national energy emergency. The European spot LNG market was in freefall. Brent crude hit $127 a barrel by the time Asian markets opened, and in the Strait of Hormuz, the USS Abraham Lincoln carrier strike group held its position. It did not withdraw. It did not escalate. It held the line, engines turning, radars scanning, weapons free, waiting. The IRGC had thrown its most sophisticated combined arms attack since the war began. It had damaged the world's most important energy infrastructure. It had deployed submarines in fast attack swarms against the most capable carrier strike group in the U.S. inventory, and it had been stopped, not fully. The fires at Ras Laffan were proof of that, but the strike group was intact. The strait was open. The IRIS Fateh was surfaced and retreating. The fast boats were running for port with 3 of their number on the bottom of the Gulf. This was not a victory, but it was not a defeat. It was a demonstration of something more important than either, that the U.S. Navy, even in the third week of a multi-front war, even in a contested electromagnetic environment, even against a synchronized multi-vector threat that combined ballistic missiles, loitering munitions, cruise missiles, submarines, and surface swarms in a single 47-minute operation, still owned the kill chain. The IRGC knew it. The Kremlin knew it. Beijing knew it. The question that every intelligence agency in the world was now asking was not whether the U.S. could defend the strait. It was whether Tehran was desperate enough or rational enough to try again. Iran had fired its most complex combined arms strike of the conflict and achieved partial infrastructure damage but 0 kills against U.S. naval assets. Its submarine had been pinned, its fast boats had been turned, its missile batteries had been struck, and its electronic warfare operations had been absorbed and defeated. The price Iran paid in equipment, personnel, and credibility in a single 47-minute window was enormous, but Ras Laffan was burning, and as long as the fires burned, the message that the IRGC wanted to send to every LNG buyer in Asia and Europe was being received loud and clear. This strait, this supply chain, this foundation of the global energy order is no longer safe. That is the real weapon Iran is now deploying. Not missiles, not submarines, not drones, economic terror, the weaponization of energy dependency, and the sobering truth that no carrier strike group, however capable, however prepared, however technologically superior, can be everywhere at once across 106 square kilometers of burning industrial city, 33 nautical miles of contested strait, and the 77 million tons of LNG per year that the modern world has decided it cannot live without. Stay sharp, stay informed, because the war for the Strait of Hormuz is not over. It is only entering its most dangerous phase, the phase where a regime with nothing left to lose decides that if it cannot win, it will make sure no one else does either. What would you do if you were the carrier strike group commander at 0353 free, with a submarine ahead and a swarm closing from behind? Tell me in the comments, and subscribe because the next 47 minutes are already being planned.